Welcome to the commencement of Plenary 4, Ask the Experts. But just before that, the commercial break. There were some questions asked in Plenary 3 relating to the involvement of volunteers, stroke survivors and carers in research. As I walked out of Plenary 3 and went to the exhibition area, I encountered a company called Document Capture Company, and this is their logo. They help to translate research material into forms that is more readily available and accessible to people with aphasia or other post-stroke conditions. So if anybody was interested in the answer about participation in stroke research by survivors and carers, as well as the answers that were given this morning, there is another company out there, and I promised to give them an advertisement in the commercial break, and they'd be delighted to hear from you to find out about your perspectives on how research material can actually be better presented if it's a questionnaire or anything else that's trying to gather people's views and thoughts and opinions. Document Capture Company, and they're in the exhibition area out there. So, to business. I'm me again. You will notice a couple of familiar faces from session 3. You'll notice Dale here on my left and Avril on my right, your left, and Avril on my left, who were speakers in session 3. We're joined by John Barrick, Chief Executive of the Stroke Association. We're joined at the other end of the table by Alex Hoffman, Stroke Programme Manager at the Royal College of Physicians. And in the middle, we're joined by Philip Bath, Professor of Stroke Medicine here at Nottingham University. I'll just remind you that if you do have any questions that you want to write down on a piece of paper and have somebody else ask them on your behalf, then please do so and wave the pieces of paper in the air so someone can take them and ask the question on your behalf. We will, as ever, have 2 Stroke Association staff amongst the audience with microphones to help amplify the sound so everybody can hear them. So I'm going to resist the temptation to accept the suggestion to say that because this is an Ask the Experts session, we from the panel should ask everybody here in the hall questions and you should answer. I'm going to resist that temptation, even though it is actually a very good suggestion because you are the experts. I'm going to resist that temptation, and I'm going to stick by the normal rules of business, which is to ask you for your questions to any of the panel here. And I'd like to start with a question that was written down and handed on a piece of paper just to prove that the piece of paper system works. The question says, and I hereby declare an interest in this, it is not my question, but I'm very interested in the answer. How much research is being done with people who had a stroke many years ago? The person asking this question had a stroke 27 years ago. Well, whoever you are, you beat my record, and I think you are entitled to an answer to your question. Who'd like to answer that question? Avril.
Okay, so the bottom line is not nearly enough. So there are kind of 2 questions within that. The first is whether we follow people up, what we call longitudinal research. So we follow people up to know about their natural recovery over many years. And we actually have very, very little information about that. We've very few studies been done in the UK. I can think of one that's been done in America, but it didn't really follow people up for a long time. The other question within that might be about following people up long term with regard to giving them late therapy. And we don't know very much about that either. There are some studies out there that are published that have looked at giving therapy to people about 6 months after stroke. And the results from those have been very promising, but unfortunately they're quite small studies and not enough to really change evidence. But our hope going forward is that we could get the money to do further work in that area The difficulty is that these sorts of trials are really, really expensive because you're trying to deliver therapy to people late after stroke, and you have to have a service around them, and you have to have mechanisms to follow them up. I hope that answers the question.
So thank you, Avril. So having broken the ice, very good. I'll take the first question from the lady in the peach-coloured blouse, and the second question from the lady with her hand in the air over there. And if somebody over this side would like to volunteer for the third question, it's going to make the logistics easier with the microphone. But I'll leave that for you later. First question, please.
No, I said that I was the person who asked the question, and I must say that I'm a bit disappointed about the answer, but I can understand that there isn't very much risk. But I'm just saying, hope that something will happen, but I doubt it somehow. But anyway, thank you very much for letting me know that.
So I would add that my day job is a rehabilitation stroke researcher, and I'm also, I think it's really bad, but there are some research activity around service configuration, but actually not about individual therapies for patients, or how people get better or recover over the years. But yes, I think you're right. I think it is a concern for us in stroke rehabilitation that we don't have that information.
Can I just add a couple of points? I agree. I think it's very, very disappointing, and it troubles me that we are in this position. Although my area of research is not in anywhere near that, I'm still troubled by it. But to be fair, although there's very little in terms of rehabilitation, there used to be quite a lot in terms of prevention. Now, not necessarily at 28 years, but certainly if we go back 15 years, the prevention trial, so that is trying to prevent another stroke, used to include all comers, people at 6 months, 6 years, and so on. And they showed that a number of things worked. So the early trials of blood pressure lowering and antiplatelet drugs like aspirin and so on were effective. But what we learned quite quickly is prevention should start very, very early. The risk of having another stroke is much higher immediately after the first stroke. So, if you have a stroke today, you're much more likely to have one in the next week than if we go out 5 years' time. So people learned very quickly that the way to do prevention trials was to do them pretty early. So they've moved away from that environment. Although, yes, it will be a much easier population to, if you like, enroll, because there are, unfortunately, many, many survivors out there.
Thank you for that. Word from John, and then I will come to the lady in the peach top.
There are, of course, many sorts of research, and I think most people will be familiar with the fact that the Stroke Association produces campaign reports. And these are reports where we ask people who've had a stroke for a number of years to actually report on the services that they are receiving. And you know that we've done reports on the emotional consequences of stroke, on the amount of physiotherapy that's being given to people and so on. So there are ways and means in participating, and it's quite interesting. The campaign supporters group of stroke survivors is now round about 20,000 people are on that database, and there's an opportunity to respond to the surveys when they go out. So if you are interested in participating in those sorts of campaign surveys, then that is there. I'd also say that, you know, through things such as our needs survey, which is a study of the needs of stroke survivors, what's highest, we have done work that is for people who've had a stroke for a long while. And I suppose the final point about all of this is that we're always constrained, as Dale, I think, laid out in his really excellent talk this morning, by the amount of funding that's available. And as long as stroke is seen as a poor relation of the other killer conditions, there's always constraints on the amount of funding that is available. So the message from me would be, let's make sure we keep on producing these campaign reports, because they provide the ground by which we can begin to change the sorts of resources and services that come to stroke survivors. But we also need to give the message to the powers that be that stroke funding is funded, and we need more of it so that we can actually address the needs of stroke survivors and their families for those years that are way beyond the time when they've come out of hospital.
Thank you, John. Thank you, panel. And
Chair, can I just ask a question? Because
is that allowed?
Well,
yes, of course it is.
not.
Of course it is.
I wonder if we're blinkered, because when I heard that question, I was thinking about rehabilitation to get back some function. And then while you were talking, I was thinking about prevention. And you've already also John and you have mentioned service configuration. Are we being blinkered? Are there other questions, those of you who had a stroke 5 years ago, that we should be asking? Because maybe we're not thinking of the right questions.
Can I just hold the responses to that question and ask this very patient lady her question?
I've forgotten. I've had a stroke, you know. Seriously, I had my stroke in 2008. I had very good treatment when I got to the community hospital, and I had rehabilitation after. First, I used to go once a week, then once a fortnight for an hour, then once a month, and then they said, go away, we can't do any more for you. I didn't know I could self-refer myself for any more. So obviously, trying to get myself moving and motivated, I picked up a lot of bad habits from walking, which are far harder to break, obviously, if you pick bad habits up, than to learn from the beginning. So I didn't realise I could self-refer myself through my GP to get some more. Nobody ever told me this. So I've been 6-7 years without anything. And just by a passing comment, I found myself, you know, I could have some more rehabilitation. Why doesn't anybody tell you these things when you're in hospital or when you're signed off from the rehabilitation in the first place?
Thank you. Who'd like to have the first go at that?
I absolutely agree with you. And the problem that we have is that, make no mistake about it, it depends where you live, what services you get. So there is a postcode lottery out there, and we're well aware of that. And it often comes down to, we know that some things work better than others, and we know some things work really well, but whether you will get that depends on the politics and the service in your area. Now, something as simple as that, you think everyone would know that, but they don't. And the reason they don't is because it doesn't actually work in every area. Some rehabilitation groups will not accept referrals from GPs directly, some will. Some people have to go back and have a consultant referral. Some people will get a referral from one therapist to another. So although we talk about what national provision is, the difficulty is that we're all doing things slightly difficultly. That doesn't help you at all, but actually that's the reality.
It's me again. Just say something else. I was involved, I was quite instrumental in helping Worcestershire, I think it's NHS, to do a stroke pathway. And I was instrumental in devising questions to ask stroke survivors after 6 weeks after the stroke, 6 months after the stroke, but all their funding was stopped, and that is so important to have, you know, follow-up. I've never had a follow-up for 5-6 years. Nobody's ever asked me, how are you getting on? It's all down to yourself. And that, when you've had a stroke, that is not what you want to do. You want somebody to help you. Okay, you've got to help yourself, you know, and it's only you that can do it yourself, but you're not given any support at all when after you leave. It's all down to yourself to find out all these things. And when you've had a stroke, believe you me, you just don't want to do that. You just want to feel very sorry for yourself. And you can feel, and it's very depressing. And if nobody tells you anything, this is why I thought, you know, these questions that we devised, of course all the funding for that was stopped, so that's not gone any further.
Thank you very much. Does anybody else want to take us to the original question about self-referral? Why isn't it more widely known about? Is it something that should be exploited more? So, the microphone's on its way to you, on your right-hand side. Right-hand side.
I had my stroke 18 years ago. I'm chairman of a stroke group, that has just celebrated its 20th birthday. It was set up by the community physio, and we still do exercises with the physio every week, and helps maintain people's ability to keep going, put it that way. And I'm sure we'd be delighted to get involved in research. We've got several members who've been, well, 2 members who've been there for nearly 20 years, newer members, and I'm sure they'd all be delighted to assist with research.
And off the top of your head, and I realise this may be a little bit of pressure, from your perspective, sir, is there a particular area that you feel would be quite attractive to research in terms of long-term stroke survivors?
Well, we do exercise, mainly seated, well, all seated really, partly because we can't get an additional physio. The physio feels that for health and safety purposes, she would need assistance to do standing exercises. But it does maintain people's ability physically and mentally to keep going, encourages them. And on the whole, the health is much better by keep going.
Okay. So, gentleman here and then the gentleman at the back will be the second question.
I'm aware of two. I'm aware of 2 research projects. I'm a lay member of the trial steering committee for the Extras trial, which is based in Newcastle, but is a multi-centre study looking at long-term rehabilitation after the finish of early supported discharge. And people are being contacted for up to 18 months after they're discontinued from early supported discharge to find out whether there are any deteriorations and what the economics are of instituting further care. And this has come to the end of recruitment, and so we're now moving on to analyse the outcomes of that. But that might give some hope for the future for if the economics prove to be more effective than leaving people to just manage themselves, it might help people in the long term. The other study is also being conducted from Newcastle, and that is the Rattles study, and that is looking at upper limb paralysis and the use of robotic systems to improve arm and shoulder movements. And these again, if you go to the clinical research network table, get information about it's okay to ask. Your GPs and your consultants should be able to help you get into these long-term studies.
Thank you, sir. So you can see how poor a chairman I am, and that I'm also making myself a liar, because we are actually now in a situation where we are consulting the experts in the room.
Can I just say one thing?
Could I just take the comment from the gentleman at the back, because I think it might be relevant, and then we'll come back.
Yeah, it's basically, for the last 15 years I've been helping this as a group. The one thing that keeps coming back and back and back is you get 3 months, 6 months, or you volunteer for a research area. Why isn't the Stroke Association pushing for 4 to 5 years intensive looking after people after strokes? Because it does take that time to develop people, back to as much as we can get, back, if I'm saying the right thing, if you know where I'm coming from. Because rehabilitation is so important for everybody here, one way or another, and there's not enough blanket rehabilitation. It is very hit and miss. It is very, very postcode lottery.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll invite Avril to make the point that she wanted to, and then I'll come to John to talk about the lobbying that Stroke Association is doing for care pathways and post-discharge care.
Okay, so I'll just make a very quick comment. So I know about both of those studies, and actually I'm involved in the first one. The difficulty about those studies is that they are highly selective groups of people who've had a stroke. So, for example, in the first study, we're looking at people who have gone through early supported discharge and looking at giving them more treatment. Now, the issue is that people who have early supported discharge are amongst the people who've probably had the better recovery at the beginning. So the difficulty that we have, even when we do have some studies, is whether we can translate the results of those studies out to the average person who has a stroke, if there is such a thing. But we have to be careful that the research that we do, whilst it's important that we do research looking at particular groups, I think we have to look more at generic overall research rather than these quite specific populations. But you're right about those studies.
Just a general point, if I may. So in my presentation this morning, I focus mostly on research into acute care, but there is a significant amount of research going on into rehabilitation and long-term care. So we're funding the RATTLE study, so that you mentioned too, for example, there's research going on in Bradford looking at long-term care for stroke survivors too. And certainly from our perspective, we spend as much money on rehabilitation and long-term research as we do on acute research, just to kind of make that point really.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dale. I think it's very important that we make sure that everybody knows that we do fund that research. I look at a lot of these things in terms of, I'm afraid, of what is the art of the possible. And the reality is that I'm quite apprehensive about what the next 5 years might actually bring in terms of the amount of resource that's available for the longer term pathway, the support for people beyond their discharge from hospital. And I think we need to be realistic that the way that politics are shaping up, we're going to have a difficult time in terms of advancing progress around more support in the community, around defending welfare benefits and so on. So, you know, in a way, we need all of you to be engaged with us in actually saying what are the sorts of priorities that we need to have as the charity that is trying to be the voice of stroke survivors and their families, because we can't actually do everything. And you know, I'm very proud, for example, of what Dale was saying this morning, the progress we're making in research and so on. And we'll continue to put more resources into research over the next few years. But we're also faced with the fact that we can make research progress, and we have to see that research translated into changes in practice that actually mean that we're not going through massive postcode lotteries all across the country, that some areas are actually trying to take latest research into practice, but others have just given up the fight to do that. And against all of that background, we are going to see an attempt to cut 13 billion off of welfare benefits. And even this morning I was reading about that there are ideas to actually get around the cutting of the benefits by actually saying they're going to tax the benefits instead, which would mean that people who are now in receipt of benefits would get less because they'll be paying tax on them and so on. So, you know, we have to be aware that there are all these things coming, and we need to listen to you, the stroke survivors, about what are the important issues that we can put our limited resources into. Sorry if I'm a bit depressing about that, but we have to actually keep that in mind.
Thank you, John. A word from Philip. And then there's a lady with the white blouse and a black or dark blue gilet, I think. That's my next question after Philip has spoken. And I think there's a lady in white over there that's holding up a piece of paper with a question on it that I'd like to be brought forward. Philip.
Could I just pick up the issue of why isn't there 4 to 5 years of long-term rehabilitation? And I want to make a generic point, and this is a research point. And it is based on the premise of it is bleeding obvious. There are many things in medicine, not just stroke, which are bleeding obvious, and when you test them, they don't work. So it is very important that when experts like me or experts like you say something, well, it's obvious, 4 to 5 years of long-term rehab must be better than none. we have to test that, because actually it might not be correct. And I can give you an example, just if you want one. We know that single antiplatelet, so blood thinning tablets like aspirin, are effective. So the obvious question is, rather than taking one, should you take two? And the answer is 2 is not better than 1, or 2 are not better than 1, very simply because the increasing bleeding matches the reduction in more strokes and heart attacks. So you get no added benefit. So we must test these questions, even if they're very obvious to us emotionally.
Thank you, Philip. Lady here then.
What I was trying to ask today was about the problem of a bleed rather than a clot. I didn't know there was a difference. I've only found that out today, and I had my stroke in 2004. And the reason that I am on such a low aspirin tablet is because I had a bleed, not a, sorry, I find it difficult to find the words, a clot. So I think it's so important that we are told these things, because I had no idea that there was a difference. I just thought I'd had a stroke and that was it. And that I needed statins to keep my blood thin. And the reason I came off them was because they didn't make me feel very good, so I went on to aspirin. And then when the hospital, I had to go into hospital again, said, no, you need a much lower aspirin intake, because I was on 300, I'm on 150 now. And I couldn't understand why. And I think we should be taught more why we're taking what we're taking.
Thank you.
Just a very, very quick response to that, not specific to you. But I think all of those of you who have had strokes many years ago, we've heard about 26 years ago, 9 years ago, 18 years ago, 15 years ago, and 11 years ago. Things do move on. So it is important that you do go back and discuss with your general practitioner whether you are now on the optimal things. Because what was right back in 2004 or 2008 or whenever may not be appropriate now. It might have fallen behind. So I would urge you all to go back and say, you know, do I need other things as well?
Thank you, Philip. Could I just pick on the final part of the question that the lady just asked and direct it perhaps to Alex? Is there anything, Alex, that the National Audit says about availability of information given in hospitals about drug treatments and other matters?
Yes, we do. In the audit, we have a survey every 2 years and ask about some of the structures in every hospital and staffing. But we also ask about the kind of information that's available for patients. So that's a sort of a checklist idea of, is there generally some communication about things. On the wider point about understanding the complexity of what a stroke is and what all the very many different types of treatment are, we do produce national guidelines for stroke, which are primarily for the professionals, so they're written in language that the professionals will find easier to understand, but they are available. You can download those for free. And there is a patient version of that, which actually goes into quite a lot of detail about what an antiplatelet is and all of these different kinds of drugs and what the different kinds of stroke are. So yes, we do ask rather generally about whether information is given. As to the quality of the detailed information you get given, I think what everybody finds is that it depends when you're given it, and is it repeatedly given, and is it in a way that you can understand or think is important. But things like, is it a hemorrhage or a clot, now appear in a lot of the literature. So that should be being reinforced, because it makes a difference in terms of not just what the drugs are, but the reason for those drugs, and hopefully not having another one.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex. Now, there's a lady with the white that's been very patient, after which there's a lady with, I think, an orange lanyard that's been, again, very patient, and following that, we'll probably have time for one more question. So do I have a third? Okay, two. And then we'll see where we are on time. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we'll see whether we come out of time. Madam.
Yesterday's paper talked about music and various types of music benefiting high blood pressure. My question is, what type of therapies and frequencies are being used in stroke research? And considering that high-frequency technology is used to break up a kidney stone, what sort of frequency would be applied to the skin gently to break up a blood clot so you didn't have to invade even?
Let's start with music.
Okay, so I picked up two parts of that question. The first one, I haven't got a clue. And I said, you talked about music therapy. Now, I know that there is a music therapy project going on here, because I know Nikki's involved in it. But I don't know what kind of music or what frequencies. So maybe someone better than me does.
A certain kind of music will lower your blood pressure.
Yes, but I don't know what sort of music or what frequencies. The stone-breaking frequencies are not just about the frequency, but also the energy. So this is people who have kidney stones, which cause excruciating pain as you try and pass them. So it's as much about the energy and the power. Now, that has been moved on to stroke in the what we call the hyperacute phase, so the first 6 hours or so. And if you put sound wave energy, and this is frequencies higher than you and I can hear, this is sort of bat-like frequencies. If you did that on top of clot-busting drugs, would it increase the effectiveness of breaking up the clot? And sadly, about 2 or 3 months ago, that trial got stopped because it didn't work.
Okay.
You've actually got all the people here that you could possibly need to do music therapy, to give you the feedback, wouldn't cost you anything. All they do is let you know what music actually helps them to breathe more easily or relax more easily.
Very good point. Thank you, madam. Can we now come to the lady with the orange lanyard, number 2, 4.
Thank you. I'm asking this question on behalf of this lady. She'd like to ask, why is it so difficult to find a therapist to help somebody with aphasia who can't understand what other people are saying? And what kind of therapies could be done now after a stroke 5 years ago?
Thank you for the question. Who'd like to first go at that?
Sorry, just the reasons why there isn't very much speech therapy in some places. Was that the question? Yep. We do know that staffing numbers vary across the country, and we have those numbers in the survey that we produce. I think that we know that speech therapists often don't stay in the job for very long. And we know, John was just telling me, there are speech therapists who can't get a job that are looking for other work because obviously some staffing numbers are being cut. So I can't say all of the reasons, but obviously there are a number of them. Sorry, what was the other half of the question?
And it was looking at therapies and what could be done in the longer term, so after a stroke 5 years ago, with regard to aphasia, I believe.
I was a speech therapist a very long time ago, and I don't feel I can answer that.
So again, there are issues about what we really know, but what may help is that there was a large study that was conducted and showed, now I'm wording this very carefully, but that there was the same benefit for particular patients in having practice conversations with people they didn't know, as there was with qualified speech and language therapists. So it's about practice, but it's about practice with people who don't know you personally. So it doesn't usually work with family, because family know what you're trying to say, and they know what your little quirks are, and they know what your interests are, so they probably jump in too quickly to help. But there is some suggestion that if you can practice and that you're in a situation where you are calm, you're not flustered, you're not trying to get money sorted or tell someone something important, but that you have practice opportunities, there is evidence that that is very beneficial and maybe just as beneficial as actually having a therapy session with a qualified therapist.
Okay, thank you, Avril. Who was my third question was down here.
Thank you. Can I just mention that if we can get Eva Park funded, that's a really ideal place to practice functional conversation, so everybody can vote for Eva Park, the posters around. But my question, Dale, can you give me a one-word answer so I can get another question in? Your thrombectomy, you told us earlier, is it safer than the thrombolysis?
All trials, sorry, this is several words, but all trials have to look at safety and efficacy. And what we're interested in is the overall benefit. And as Dale said, the overall benefit is in favour of benefit. So yes, it is safe in the sense that you don't undo the good that you do by pulling the clot out. Is it perfectly safe? Of course not. Nothing is perfectly safe. And occasionally it doesn't work, and very occasionally it goes wrong. But overall, far more people benefit. Something like if you treat 5 people, 2 will benefit. So about what we call a number needed to treat of 2.5. So you treat 5, 2 benefit. And that includes all the bad bits. Overall, 2 out of 5 benefit.
And so how many out of your 5 wouldn't see tomorrow?
Sorry, I missed the end.
Could you repeat that, please?
How many out of your 5 people, if 2 are benefiting, how many of them wouldn't see tomorrow?
Oh, it would be a fraction of the 5. I mean, I'd have to go back to the trials. I don't think there was any evidence of increased death rate in the studies.
Yay! So there is hope for our children?
There's hope in the next 3, 4, 5 years. It's not just your children.
Fab. And my proper question was about 20... You mentioned earlier 24/7 hospitals. Is this actually going to happen? And is it going to happen everywhere, or is it going to happen in London and Manchester and Nottingham?
Well, the one that's open today is in Northumbria. I'm not aware of any other in the country. This was news to me when it was raised earlier. Sorry? It's the only one at the moment. It's very much an acute hospital. It's a referral place. So it's a drive-by hospital. If you have a stroke or a heart attack, you will drive by your local hospital and go to this one. And then once you've been treated and stabilized, you will then be repatriated. And as the website, if you have a fracture, you go to your local hospital, you don't go to that one. So in other words, they're focusing resources in intensive areas where we know specialist services are effective.
So is that like a trial?
Sorry?
Is that kind of a trial to possibly be rolled out across the country?
I couldn't speak to that, but I hope so.
Okay, thank you very much. Quite appropriately, can I now come to what may have to be our final question, that lady appropriately wearing the Stroke Association T-shirt.
I'm chairman of Bolton West Stroke Group. We've been running now for self-funded for 3 years under the umbrella of the Stroke Association. We do all sorts of activities. We do yogas, exercise, trips out, and our members, most of all our members, we encourage research. So please bring it on to us, because we'll help with anything. It's so important to everybody when they've had a stroke to be involved. So please, don't forget us up in the north.
Did you say, madam, you're from the Bolton group?
Bolton West.
Respect. I'm from Horwich. Thank you.
Could I just make a comment to that? This is very much something that you can do that I don't think I can do, or even the Stroke Association necessarily can do. There's a pendulum. Dale and I were talking about this earlier this morning over coffee. There's a pendulum, and there's no doubt that in the past, lots of things went under the guise of stroke, and the ethics of it was highly questionable. I mean, if you go to the extreme, Nuremberg was all about experiments in the Second World War, and clearly we had to move away from that. I would argue the pendulum has gone too far. Avril mentioned this earlier. We now are tied up in knots, and if you want a very simple example, it is almost as difficult to do a study with 10 people in it as 10,000. The paperwork is approximately the same. Now, that has to be stupid, doesn't it? We are banging the table about this over and over again, and we're not persuading. There are a group of do-gooders out there, often who have never had a stroke or a heart attack or anything else, who feel that they must impart their morals and ethics on the rest of us. And we need them because they need to keep us in check. But I would argue that the pendulum has gone too far, and we need people like you, all of you, to locally work on those who make our rules and filter it up into the government to say, look, guys, good idea, but you've gone too far. We need to simplify things. There are ongoing efforts to try and simplify things. Dale was talking about them earlier with the chief, well, the person who's both the chief medical officer and runs the National Institute of Health Research, who is going to commission a study into trying to, you know, how can we cut bureaucracy? But I would argue that this is one of those areas where we need some pressure from above, but equally some pressure from below, a pincer action to try and make things better, because the current situation is absurd.
Thank you, Philip. All of yourselves as delegates may think it's a good thing or a bad thing if I observe that there is only myself and one other person who stands between you and lunch. So I'm afraid, fascinating as this is, I have to draw it to a close. Otherwise, we'll end up with everybody in the room starving. So first of all, I'd like to, on your behalf, to express a thanks to the speakers on the podium here. And if you wish to join in the appropriate manner, then please do so in saying thanks to our experts. Could I ask our experts on the podium to reciprocate by giving the normal appreciation to the experts in the room? And can I say that I'm sure that a lot of messages and areas of interest will come out of this conversation. One of them particularly that has struck my mind, and I, as I said before, do have a vested interest in this to declare, is that there is obviously in the recent discussion a very, very keen interest in the long-term effects of long-term survivors from stroke. And I'm sure that message will be taken away by all of us here and everybody else to whom it's relevant. I'd just like to perhaps coin a phrase on behalf of everybody in the room, and I'm sure I include the people on the podium here as well, that we all realise that a stroke is for life. In addition to which, the Stroke Association is for life after stroke. And so out of that good combination of things that affect a very serious situation and a very serious affliction, hopefully we can continue all together, not just at this stroke assembly, but in those to come, to continue the good work on behalf of stroke survivors and their carers, because I detect a very high degree of common interest and common cause here, expressed in very appropriately energetic and enthusiastic terms, but we are all on the same side as this, and I thank you all for your questions. So as the speakers on the podium leave the stage, I thank them again on your behalf, and I'd like to invite to the stage Graham Maguire, who will make our closing remarks. Graham, would you like to come up as everybody else moves down? Graham sits on the steering group that organises this UK Stroke Assembly and represents the voice of stroke survivors from Scotland and those with aphasia. So, Graham.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the delegates, that's the stroke survivors and also the carers, it's my duty to say a few words of thanks and a few words of observation about the course. And I know that you're needing your lunch, so I'll make it very brief. First of all, I have to say thanks to the chairman here and also the chairman yesterday who really did an excellent job making the whole thing gel and be so successful. The excellent speakers that we've had yesterday and also today, very, very, very good and much appreciated. The superb organisation. It's always surprising how well it's done, and it's improving every year. The hotel facilities are superb. That's good. Was the dinner all right last night too? Good, it seems to be all right. But the main thing I have to say is to thank you as participants for coming, because if you don't come, we can't have the conference. And we had over 150 participants here. If you include all the people involved, it's almost 200 people involved in this conference. So that's really great. So many thanks to you all for coming, and thanks to all those speakers that have made the whole program so worthwhile from our point of view. So we hope to see you maybe next year at the same time, and I hope that you'll keep that in mind for next year. Thank you very much, and thank you.